Good afternoon. I want to thank you all for tuning in to yesterday's press conference, and I also want to thank the people of South Dakota for all of their hard work and their diligence to sticking to the plan that we have laid out for the state of South Dakota and the importance of social distancing, practicing good hygiene, and following the CDC guidelines and recommendations. Yesterday, I outlined a couple of additional steps that we're taking in the state to help flatten the curve, and we are at a critical point in time. On May 2nd, I issued an executive order that gave directions to the state of South Dakota on mitigation efforts that we would undertake. The executive order that I renewed yesterday and signed extended that deadline through May 31st and changed some of the language in the executive order from should to shall. If you remember last Friday, I had a press conference where I included the executives and the chief medical officers and experts from our three major healthcare systems, along with our state epidemiologist and our Secretary of Health, Kim Malzahn-Risden. We all agreed on the plan for South Dakota, where we would add capacity to our healthcare systems and add equipment and ventilators to meet the needs that South Dakota will have to have in order to take care of people in the coming months. What we did yesterday with the executive orders that I signed was make sure that we were enforcing that plan and that we knew how we were going to work forward to make sure that we could tackle all of this together as a state. Now, Friday's projections were all agreed to, and yesterday the executive orders put in place what we needed to make sure that we could complete and successfully take care of South Dakota following that plan. Now, the new executive order that I signed gave some directives specifically to an individual group in the counties of Minnehaha and Lincoln County. And the individuals in that group are those that are 65 years old and older, and those that have chronic medical conditions. I'm going to list the chronic medical conditions that are addressed by the executive order that I am asking these individuals to stay home for the next 3 weeks. Those who have chronic lung disease and people who have moderate to severe asthma, serious heart conditions, diabetes, liver disease, or chronic kidney disease, and persons who are on dialysis. Those individuals and those that are 65 years old or older, I'm telling you to stay home for the next 3 weeks if you live in the counties of Minnehaha or Lincoln County. This will be incredibly helpful to us as we work to flatten the curve in the state of South Dakota and in that area that is heavily populated. First, I want you all to go to covid.sd.gov, and I want you to read this executive order so that you are clear on what the expectations are. There are some exceptions if you work in critical infrastructure jobs, and if you need to run essential errands. Those are all clearly laid out in the executive order, which you can find on covid.sd.gov. Please read the guidance that is there as well. And a majority of our positive cases today in the state of South Dakota are located in these two counties. That's why it's incredibly important that people that live in Minnehaha and Lincoln counties do comply with the recommendations that are laid out in that executive order. And again, I need everyone in those groups to take this very seriously. This week is Public Health Week. I want to personally thank every single person who works in the health arena, from doctors and nurses to EMTs, public health officials. We are every day just so internally grateful for the work that you do by being on the front lines to help protect our population here in the state of South Dakota, working long hours, oftentimes neglecting time with your family to make sure that you're doing your job and you're doing it with absolute excellence. And we are just so incredibly proud of each and every one of you. And finally, in times of adversity, we often see that South Dakotans are stepping up. They're working on the front lines to help take care of individuals. They're supporting families who have lost loved ones during this difficult time. They're donating to charities that will aid those that are in need, either because of sickness or because of economic trouble. And they're taking seriously all the ways that we can work together to slow the spread of this virus in the state of South Dakota. Jointly, all of these measures are helping us fight COVID-19 in the state. But also another weapon that we have that many of us during this week of Holy Week rely on is the power of prayer. For many South Dakotans, Holy Week is a special time of year for a lot of us, and also those of the Jewish faith start to recognize and celebrate Passover on the evening of Wednesday, April 8th. Therefore, I am issuing an executive proclamation declaring April 8th, 2020 as a day of prayer, to pray for success in the fight of this disease, to pray for comfort for those who have lost someone, to pray for strength for all of those who continue to fight, both in South Dakota and around the world. I would ask that all of us in this state take the opportunity to join together and pray as we sign this executive proclamation today to declare tomorrow, April 8th, as a day of prayer throughout our state. And with that, I will open it up for any questions that you may have.
Governor Lee Strubinger with SDPB.
Yes, Lee.
I've spoken with some mayors in some more rural communities, and they're kind of concerned about potentially being overloaded with cases. Why not extend this 65 and older and chronic medical condition more broadly as opposed to just Minnehaha and Lincoln?
As I said yesterday, we will consider that at the appropriate time. We have concerns in the Minnehaha and Lincoln County areas right now today and want to work to protect that vulnerable population. That's why you saw me sign the executive order that I did yesterday. We will continue to evaluate every single county and part of the state in the coming days.
This is Trevor Mitchell with the Argus Leader.
We'll go with Trevor, and then we'll come to Kelly in the room. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Governor. I'm wondering if you're, under the executive action, you've spoken about these individuals, the vulnerable individuals as they're referred to. Does the classifications and the directive that you've provided, does that qualify them under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act for the additional sick leave, expanded family, or medical leave, depending on what situation they fall under? Is the directive you've given provide that for them?
We are evaluating each of those on a case-by-case basis. So if they will reach out to us, we will certainly help them determine if they're eligible or not.
So the executive order says people over 65, but we had also heard 65 and older in press conferences. Could you just clear up which is the best one to use?
You know, we would, the specific age says older than 65. We will follow the guidance that is in the executive order as it's posted on covid.sd.gov.
Apparently, work on the Keystone XL pipeline has begun in Montana. Do you know when they're supposed to start in South Dakota? And are you concerned about contractors coming in and spreading the virus?
I do know that there is future plans for construction through the state of South Dakota. I don't know the time frame. I did visit with the company some time back and told them that I would expect them to follow all of the guidelines, recommendations, and executive orders that I have laid out for the people of South Dakota. So they indicated that they would be complying with all of the restrictions that I would have in place at the time they would start construction, although I don't believe they will be coming into South Dakota in the near future.
Governor, this is Stephen Groves from the AP.
Yep, Stephen, go ahead.
I wonder if you could tell me, with the projection that 5,000 hospital beds will be needed and the current numbers where we're at, looking at those numbers, it's obvious that there's a shortage. Are you looking at alternative sites for caring for people, and what might those look like?
Yes, we are looking at alternative sites and adding more capacity to our healthcare systems. We do have a plan in place that all of the healthcare systems have agreed to is workable and that we can achieve in time to add the capacity that we would need to take care of the people of South Dakota. So like I previously announced last week, the National Guard is currently setting up hospitals in Sioux Falls and in Rapid City that will help with our capacity, and we'll continue to add infrastructure and staff and equipment as necessary to meet the plan that was agreed to.
On the website, you list a certain number of persons as recovered. Could I just get a little bit more details about how you classify someone as recovered?
Sure. Sure. Kim Elsom-Reisen with the Department of Health. The criteria for a person to recover from COVID-19 is that they are free from fever for at least 3 days. Their symptoms of COVID-19 have resolved, and they have been isolated for at least 7 days. So the minimum is 7 days. That can go a little bit longer depending on when their fever breaks.
Thank you.
Governor, a question from Kello AM in Sioux Falls. Who is supposed to enforce the revised order, and a follow-up?
The executive order that was issued, there was 2 of them issued yesterday. And what that is direction to the state of South Dakota about what compliance they should have with guidelines that we've laid out for an action to adhere to the plan that we put out last Friday. So we will be using appropriate enforcement measures as necessary that I do have at my disposal. But we have not run into an incident yet where that's been necessary.
I think the question was who specifically would enact that enforcement?
It's in my executive order, so I would expect that if there's enforcement action to be taken, it would be mine.
And the follow-up then, what's the penalty for someone in Lincoln or Minnehaha County who is over 65, who has a chronic illness or doesn't comply?
We will deal with that when it is necessary. We did have a bill that came before the legislature last week that we talked about some enforcement mechanisms we wanted to give to the Secretary of the Department of Health. The legislature did not support that bill. Therefore, that is not a tool that we have available to us today.
Governor Noem, back to the hospital issue. This is Morgan from the Rapid City Journal. Where is the National Guard building the hospitals? Where are they going to go?
We have professionals in planning and engineering within the National Guard that are going to do site location analysis. So they will be coming forward with a plan. They're in the current stage of planning and laying out what facility would work best for that. And we do have facilities that are appropriate in Rapid City and in Sioux Falls. So we'll be letting you know in the coming days. But again, we peak in mid-June. We are planning to reach that capacity in plenty of time before then. And I'm incredibly confident in the ability of our National Guard to help us get there.
So we don't know specifically where it'll be yet, but we'll know in the next week or so.
You will know when we're ready to let the public know exactly how that stand-up is going.
Okay, thanks.
Governor, this is Stephen Groves with the AP.
Yep, go ahead, Stephen.
So with the numbers of hospital capacity, the Secretary of Health said that there's a surge capacity of 4,400 plus another 200 for the National Guard. That's still short of the 5,000 in the projection. Where would those extra beds come from, or where would they be placed?
This is Kim Elsom-Reisen. So the hospitals across the state are working with us to identify additional sites where we can stand up the additional beds that we're going to need.
And I want to remind you that the plan that was agreed to by the healthcare systems, the state, and the Department of Health said we would add 5,000 beds that would be dedicated to COVID-19 patients, 1,300 ventilators. We also, since then, with the new executive order, by putting more mitigation measures in place for Minnehaha and Lincoln counties, we anticipate that number necessary could be less. The more mitigation measures we put in lowers what we need, but we're still going to continue to over-plan and over-prepare. We want to make sure that we have the capacity to adequately take care of South Dakotans, and we will be ready.
So, Governor, if it's necessary to issue a stay-at-home order in order to relieve the load on hospital capacity, will you do that?
I have said many times that I would use every tool that I have available to me at the appropriate time.
What threshold would it take to issue a public health emergency? What kind of cases would the state have to have in order for that to get issued?
This is Kim Elsom-Reisen. So public health emergencies and the statutes around those are specific to situations when individual people are not complying with a directive and are putting other people at risk. And so a public health emergency is used for that purpose so that we can ensure individual people take action in accordance with a directive to keep themselves and others safe. That's the applicability of that. The current state of emergency has a much broader application, and so it's important to keep in mind the two differences between those orders.
Governor, Secretary, this is Megan Morat with News Center 1. Is there anything that can be learned from the fact that East River cases continue to rise, but they're not really doing so West River?
This is Kim Elsom-Risden. I think there's been some theories out there. Certainly population density does play a role in how quickly this disease spreads, and we've seen that in other locations as well. But it's certainly nothing for anybody to sit back and wait for. We need to prepare now. We will see COVID cases across the entire state, including West River.
Does that population density play into the models that you're running, and say a peak across the state might not average to a peak that we would see West River?
We're actively monitoring the situation as we get new data points, and we do anticipate that we'll see, fluctuations in the number of positive cases in different parts of the state at different dates.
Thank you.
Governor JP from KORN News Radio.
Hi, JP.
Say, just wanted to ask you about, I understand the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe has set up some checkpoints by the Meade-Ziebach County line of the Missouri River Bridge, and then Highway 63 from Ziebach County line west to Eagle Butte and north to Timberlake of the Corson County line. These involve state highways. Is there any jurisdictional concerns that you have regarding these checkpoints?
Well, for many weeks now, our team has been working with tribal authorities and leadership to prepare for the virus and to limit its spread. We trust that the tribe is being thoughtful in how they're making their decisions and impacting our roadways. And we're working with them very closely to make sure they're allowing essential travelers, first responders to get through and not be slowed down or inhibited by the actions that they're taking. So I know our Secretary of Tribal Affairs, Secretary Flute, has visited with the BIA about this, and we'll continue to keep those lines of communication open.
Thank you.
One more question?
Megan Morat here again with News Center 1. Earlier in the Department of Health briefing, you mentioned that the Department of Health doesn't have a way to denote tests that are being administered by county, but is there any way to determine what tests are high priority coming in from each county to the Department of, or the health lab?
This is Kim Elsom-Risden. The question earlier on the call was whether we had a county breakdown of negative tests. And since we get those test results from a multitude of labs that have different ways of collecting information, we don't have a way to break that down by county. We do break down by county all positive cases, and we will continue to do that.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll visit with you again soon.